Edward Fishman joins me now. He is a former Russia and Europe sanctions lead at the U.S. State Department. But for the purposes of this conversation, this is really good. He's the author of a book called Choke Points. Get it? Choke Points. American Power in the Age of Economic Warfare. Edward, it's great to have you with us. You heard Nancy Cordes describe the blockade. I know you want to sort of clarify for my audience what it is and what it isn't, and what's important about trying to decide or determine what's being successfully obtained through limiting access of Iranian or vessels rather going to Iranian ports.
Sure. So look, over the last month, we had in some ways the worst of all possible worlds in the Strait of Hormuz, in which the strait was closed to everyone else's oil, so Saudi oil, UAE, Iraq, but not Iran. Iran was the only country that was able to sell oil through the Strait of Hormuz. So they were jacking up the price of oil for everyone around the globe, and they were making windfall profits selling that oil. And Trump, in a way, actually facilitated that by easing some sanctions on Iran last month. Well, I think the White House made a really smart move a couple days ago by course correcting and basically telling the Iranians that if they're going to close the strait for other countries, it's going to be closed for the Iranians as well. And so it's a gamble. There's always a risk that the Iranians could escalate. They could strike more energy facilities in the region. U.S. sailors are in harm's way. But from a strategic perspective, it does make sense. And it does provide the Iranians at least some incentive to negotiate.
And what about these sanctions announced by the Treasury Department about Iranian smuggling vessels and those that benefit from them, meaning either Iran directly or Hezbollah in Lebanon?
Look, I think the sanctions that were done today are being done sort of on the margins. If you're doing a full-scale naval blockade of Iranian oil, some sanctions on vessels aren't going to make a huge difference. But to the point made earlier, which country is buying Iran's oil? Basically, China buys all of Iran's oil. There's very little that goes anywhere besides China. So a key question in the coming days is, what's the disposition of Xi Jinping going to be? Is he going to look at this blockade and these sanctions and say, Donald Trump, you are really affecting my economy and this is not okay? Or by contrast, is he going to impose pressure on the Iranian regime and say, look, it's time to cut a deal. We need to end this thing.
Edward, it's always a delicate maneuver to try to parse a presidential social media post, but the president on Truth Social said today that China is very happy that I am permanently opening the Strait of Hormuz. How do you read that?
So it's slightly confusing because the Strait of Hormuz is not open right now. And I think that's something that we all need to be clear about, because while, the markets in many ways, I think, have downplayed this disruption, they've assumed that there would be taco, that Trump eventually would kind of back down and try to end the war. The Iranians are the ones who've closed the strait, first and foremost. And so for the strait to be reopened, the Iranians are going to have to agree to do that, or the U.S. is going to have to use military force to seize the strait. Neither of those have happened yet. And so I think it's premature right now to say that the United States has opened the Strait of Hormuz.
Edward, we are all learning about geography in this region. And another thing we are soon to learn about, if we haven't already, Bab el-Mandeb. What is that, and why is this a secondary part of this story, or maybe emerging as more than a secondary part of this story?
I'm glad you brought this up, because the Strait of Hormuz is the world's most important energy choke point. One of the few sort of pieces of good news over the last few weeks is that the Saudis have very effectively piped a lot of their oil from the east coast of their country, which is normally in the Persian Gulf, to the west coast, to the Red Sea, in this port called Yanbu. Well, the oil that goes to the Red Sea has to go through that very narrow strait, the Bab el-Mandeb, which connects the Red Sea onward to the Indian Ocean and beyond. Well, look, the Houthis in Yemen have the ability to disrupt the Bab el-Mandeb the same way that the IRGC has disrupted the Strait of Hormuz. So a major question in the coming days, can the Iranians persuade the Houthis to close the Bab el-Mandeb as a retaliation for Trump's blockade? So far, they haven't done that. But if they did, we're going to see energy prices soar even higher than they have in the past few weeks.
And that's why you see these countervailing forces of optimism and anxiety within the markets and diplomats and everyone are watching this region very closely. Edward Fishman, fantastic stuff. Thanks so much for being with us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
A quick programming note. Tune in tomorrow for a special edition of the Daily Report. Lindsay Reiser anchors Setting It Straight. Notice the spelling, S-T-R-A-I-T, which focuses on how the war with Iran is affecting your wallet. Tune in at 6 p.m. Eastern, Thursday, right here on CBS News 24/7.